Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre. Since Bernard Madoff's arrest for masterminding one of the biggest investment fraud schemes in history, there seems to be a new revelation every day. Madoff is charged with swindling investors out of more than $50 billion. His list of clients includes philanthropists and film stars, publishers and politicians, royalty and religious organizations. Madoff was a prominent figure in the Jewish community, and some feel betrayed that he used his status to lure investors who are now suffering heavy losses. On this edition of Independent Sources, we talk to an editor of the Jewish Forward about coverage of the Madoff scandal. We meet a reporter for a community paper who blogs about his beat. We looked at the coverage of immigrants on Long Island and the media's effort to build bridges. And we profile an Ecuadorian radio station that's building bridges in Queens. But first, joining me to talk about the newspaper's coverage of the Bernard Madoff story is J.J. Goldberg, editorial director of the Forward. Welcome. J.J., thank you for being here with us. The Madoff story has been covered by the mainstream press as a finance and crime story. How has the Forward been covering it?
The Forward's been covering it in two ways. First of all, as a direct impact story, since so much of the money that was lost belonged to Jewish philanthropists. He worked very much among his own circle of friends. And so Jewish philanthropy has been very hard hit because so many of the biggest supporters suddenly find themselves without money. Entire foundations have been closed down, and organizations that were key to the operations of the Jewish community, the Friends of the Technion, Israel's largest scientific university, suddenly find that their money is heavily gone. Hadassah, the Women's Zionist organization, which is the largest health organization in the Middle East. Many of the yeshivas, the seminaries, the trained rabbis, the day schools, the parochial schools, they're suddenly without money. And a wider circle is suffering because their big donors are suddenly without money.
These are essentially smart people. How was he able to deceive all of them?
That's a question that nobody has yet figured out, except that there is a chumminess, a sense of mutual reliance and trust within the Jewish community. It goes back thousands of years. It's partly the result of being a small community scattered around the world and frequently isolated and discriminated against. There was an interdependence. And so when somebody gets deeply involved in the charities, in the running of the organizations, and cares about the same things you care about and seems to be motivated by a shared sense of morality and ancestry and social ties, you trust them.
The Forward prides itself as being open, the good, the bad, whatever it is, put it out there and let people decide. And you've been covering this story with sense of seriousness and also humor. One this humor is this comic strip that you ran recently in your recent edition. Talk to us about this cartoon and why did you feel that it was okay to make fun of this?
Well, when something goes wrong, when the high and mighty take a tumble and show themselves to be no better than the rest of us, that's what humor is about. There is an instinct within the organized Jewish community of self-protection that you don't say bad things about each other. We can talk about Jews who win Nobel Prizes and take pride in them. We can even talk about Jewish home run hitters like Sean Green, but we don't talk about Jewish criminals.
Explain this cartoon to us, sort of like the gist of it and what you were trying to get at with this cartoon.
It's essentially a bunch of guys sitting around in Palm Beach, I suppose, in their beach clothes, talking about how they've successfully bilked everybody around them. And then when they realize that it's themselves that they're cheating, they suddenly become filled with moral outrage.
Very interesting. But beyond the humor, like we mentioned, you've done this, the coverage has taken a serious turn as well. One of them is you ran a editorial or op-ed piece by a professor of law at Villanova University, where he mentioned that Jewish law understands that when Sadat money is expropriated, God himself, as it were, stand as the aggrieved party. And essentially he's saying that Madoff should be tried under Jewish law.
Well, this article specifies that there are religious laws that he presumably broke as much as we understand what he did, which is not very deeply, that since so much of the money that was lost was money that would have ended up in Jewish charities, that essentially he defrauded charities and is responsible for charity money, which is a higher form of morality in religious tradition. It's money that is dedicated to God, that is in order to help other people serve God and worship God. And so he's committed a greater crime. It's almost like you bump up the level of first degree, third degree. This is fraud first degree because it's against the service of God. What the article also says is that although the Talmud and even the Bible have a very rich tradition of commercial and financial law, you know, the Bible talks as much about caring for the poor as it does about keeping your pants up. But in the last few centuries, the rabbinic treatment, the rabbi's treatment of traditional law focuses a lot more on personal activity and much less on commercial activity. Since, I suppose, the emancipation, since the time of Napoleon and even before, Jews have been allowed to enter general society. They used to be cloistered off in ghettos that were not only shut off, but they were also self-governing, and they taxed themselves. Now that it's a voluntary community, the last 200 or 300 years, you have to ask for money to finance the community, and the people who have the money become far more powerful. And the rabbis, therefore, ask a lot fewer questions, and commercial law is no longer developed as a form of religious obligation.
Interesting. Let's go back to this whole financial scheme that Madoff allegedly put together. To your knowledge, how was he able to do this over the course of decades?
He was taking money from people, presumably to invest in various securities, and providing them with dividends and returns and profits every month, the way a normal investment broker does. In his case, he was paying them back every month out of new money that he brought in. As long as he brought in new customers, the game never stopped. He's been talked about as some sort of a sociopath who was preying on other people.
You disagree with that?
I don't know. I assume that he must have known that if the scheme collapsed, he would go down with it. And he must have thought it would go on forever. There's no reason to think that for 20 years he rubbed shoulders so closely and so intimately with so many people devoted to charity and religion, and it was all a fraud. Presumably, in my mind, he thought it could go on forever and that he'd found a trick that would allow him to shower everybody with money by bringing in more people. And when the economy stopped, his money stopped coming in. Nobody predicted it. In fact, it's really like the economy itself. People were finding new instruments that used to be illegal. The only reason his activity is illegal and the rest of the banking collapse is legal is because the laws were changed to make all of these derivatives and mortgage-backed securities legal. And so suddenly the whole economy collapsed and Madoff's scheme collapsed with it.
So you saying that the way the bankers have been running the economy in the last several years has been basically a Ponzi scheme as well.
It's all been a big Ponzi scheme in the sense that more and more money is brought in to prop up, and as long as the growth goes on and there's more money available, more of these securities can be sold, and you never have to wonder whether down the road people can pay back their mortgages. Now, the real guilty people, it seems to me, are not the bankers who were simply following the rules, but the people who changed the rules to make all of this nonsense legal.
Now, what kind of response you've been getting from your readers on this issue?
There is a fair amount. It's not only us, by the way. The Jewish Week, which is another weekly in New York, and the Jewish Press and various similar papers around the country have been doing work, less investigative work than we do, but the same sort of moral discussion of how the community can police itself when it relies so much on intimacy. The readers respond with a mixture of moral outrage and supporting us and saying in much more florid terms frequently, these people are monsters, they should be brought down, they should be punished. This fellow here and others like him who say there should be a religious tribunal of some sort to punish them. Other people are focusing, and perhaps even more, on the prospect of anti-Semitism, which is always the first reaction. It's, this guy is Jewish, his associates were Jewish, are Jews going to be blamed for this? Now, there's been two major Ponzi schemes exposed since this, in the course of January, neither of which involved Jewish people. but there's an automatic instinct that Jews will be punished somehow, or that the public will turn its vengeance and fury against the Jewish community for the mistakes of these Jews.
Now, what are the stories that you've been publishing and working on this issue?
Well, a lot of it, as I say, has been about the impact on individual institutions and on some of the donors. Some of the biggest foundations, family foundations, public foundations that donate to charities have shut down. Simply woke up one morning in December and discovered that all of the money they thought they have didn't exist. There's a big debate going on about how much a person loses, whether it's the money they first put in or the money they thought they had based on the growth Madoff promised them. An awful lot of the losses seem to be paper losses because people thought they had money.
And now, what's going to happen? What's the fallout so far? I mean, beyond these organizations closing their doors, is there a rippling effect from there?
Well, the fallout has not yet been tapped in terms of the losses of institutions, cutbacks, firings. There will be fewer services provided. A lot of the focus in the Jewish community is either on the education, the schools, or on the advocacy, the pro-Israel lobby, or fighting anti-Semitism. All of that adds up to probably around the nation.
It seems that...
But there's billions of dollars going into health, into job services and employment services, family counseling, old age homes, and all of that will be affected. So it'll ripple out into a vast social support network.
It's interesting because from what you're telling us, the outrage is more about those who have gotten hurt, the community at large, not the individuals who have lost money. Is that the case?
I would say most of the focus. It is a tendency in the Jewish community press to focus mainly on the activities of the institutional community. Once you start focusing on the behavior and the lives of individual Jews, the question is, where does it end? Is Alan Greenspan, because he happened to be born Jewish, a topic for our newspaper? We don't think so. If it affects the way that the community thinks about itself as a group, then we cover it. So we'll cover the reactions of Jewish institutions. The same difficulty applies to thinking about Madoff and the people who worked with him. Was their guilt a special Jewish guilt? Does it show anything about the way Jews behave around each other, or the way that the Jewish culture, the subculture, conditions people to relate to the world around them? Is there something like that? There was an interesting forum that was convened at the Center for Jewish History a few weeks ago, where some major philosophers and financiers came to talk about what they called a community reckoning.
We'll have to leave it at that. J.J. Goldberg of The Forward, thanks for joining me. Now, here's Abi Ishola with some other news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines from New York's ethnic media. A group of Italian Americans are trying to preserve an old Catholic church in Ocean Hill, Brooklyn. The Italian Tribune reports that Our Lady of Loretto Church is at risk of being shut down because of a decrease in its parishioners. The church is currently the only remaining symbol of Italian immigrants who settled in the area in the early 1900s. From Hispanic Marketing 101, members of the National Hispanic Media Coalition say the mainstream media is responsible for recent hate crimes against Latinos. The group believes that heated discussions on immigration aired on right-wing talk shows have led to the 40% increase in anti-Latino crimes. The coalition has filed a petition for the Federal Communications Commission to investigate. From India abroad, a Queens College professor has invented a new laser that can carry out medical treatments. The laser, developed by Dr. Vinod Menon, may be used to heal wounds faster and is 95% cheaper than traditional lasers. From Black Star News, musician Quincy Jones is petitioning for President Obama to create a Secretary of Arts post in his administration. Jones has already gathered over 200,000 signatures to support his cause. And finally, many Chinese elders in Chinatown are lacing up their sneakers and heading to the gym. Singtao Daily reports that the Chinatown YMCA recently became part of the Silver Sneakers Fitness program, in which elders can work out in participating gyms for free. Within the past month, over 100 elders have signed up to use the gym's equipment and take part in special classes. Those are just a few headlines from New York's ethnic media. Back to you, Gary.
Thanks, Abby. Several property owners in Willett's Point, Queens have been fighting to keep their land since the city introduced a redevelopment plan for the industrial neighborhood in 2007. Steve Sterling is a reporter for the Times-Ledger newspapers and has been covering the ongoing issue. As tensions have escalated, so have the number of stories. So Sterling turned his beat into a blog. Abi Ishola reports.
Old scrap yards, waste processing sites, and auto repair shops. This is Willett's Point, Queens. For decades, the industrial district, also known as the Iron Triangle, has gone without basic infrastructure like storm sewers, adequate roads, and sidewalks.
You see here, Abby, you see how the road is?
Jake Bono, a longtime entrepreneur in the area, says on snowy winter days, the city leaves Willett's Point out to dry.
This isn't Mount Everest. You see how the dips and turns? You see the snowbanks, you see the snow? That's somebody, some business owner plowed the snow away from the street themselves.
In 2007, Bono and roughly 80 other property owners in the area faced more problems when Mayor Bloomberg proposed a redevelopment plan for Willett's Point. The project boasts 5,000 housing units and 2 million square feet of office and retail space just steps away from the new Mets Stadium. Though City Council passed the proposal last November, Steve Sterling, staff reporter for Times-Ledger newspapers, says similar plans have been on the agenda for Willett's Point since the 1960s.
The city's contention has just always been is that they've always viewed this as an area that's been earmarked for a larger purpose. Why put in the infrastructure for what they view as chop shops and auto wreckage yards and stuff like that.
Sterling has been covering Willett's Point for 2 years. He says the issue became even more complex when the city started asking property owners to sell their land. Those refusing to deal face the possibility of being forced out through eminent domain, a law that allows government to take private property for public purposes. This growing tension led Sterling to redirect his coverage to IronTriangleTracker.com, a Times-Ledger blog dedicated solely to Willett's Point.
I was just finding that I had much more material for this project than I could actually put into print on a week-to-week basis. So I decided to start the blog as a way to get this information out there on a daily basis to these people that I know are very interested in it.
Such as an estimated 1,600 workers whose jobs will be in limbo, and roughly 80 business owners in the area, including Jake Bono of Bono Sawdust.
Everybody's life is affected because there's uncertainty. You don't know if, when, how the city is going to move in and remove you from your land.
Land that has been in his family for 3 generations after his grandfather and great-uncles emigrated to the United States from Italy over 70 years ago.
And they actually built this building after every day of going out peddling sawdust throughout the city. They actually built this building at night.
Bono and several other landowners are planning to take legal action against the city to stop the redevelopment plan. Despite their efforts, the city has gained control of half the land area through deals with other owners. City officials maintain that they will select a developer by this spring. However, some contend that the plan won't take off for at least another 4 years. Abi Ishola for Independent Sources.
We'll be right back.
As you know, paper comes from trees. Every time trees are destroyed to make paper, we lose something that can't be replaced.
We lose the air we breathe,
The soil that grows our food,
wildlife.
and our home. You have the power to stop this. Insist that the paper you buy is tree-free. Help us win the paper campaign.
Hate crimes against immigrants from Latin America provoked intense media coverage after immigrants in Brooklyn and Long Island were killed in what police called anti-immigrant, anti-Latino attacks. Producer Michelle García looks at the coverage in the mainstream and immigrant press on Long Island and whether the media can play a role in building bridges.
Tensions on Long Island have simmered for years as the influx of new immigrants, mainly from Latin America, has changed the face of the suburb. That friction is documented in the film Farmingville has at times escalated into violence. Last year, 7 youth out to hunt Mexicans instead found 37-year-old Ecuadorian-born Marcelo Lucero.
The news coverage tends to assume, it's a crime is committed and we cover the crime.
And so what happens? The authorities, the same society, the first reaction is to solve the problem with a police approach and focus mainly on punishing the people who they have accused.
The Lucero killing propelled Newsday and La Tribuna Hispana into new territory. Newsday, which mainly serves a non-immigrant reader, launched a forum, a community discussion with mainly activists on the internet.
I think you might find certain issues that were touched in this forum that were not touched in news coverage. A certain honesty sometimes about, do we really want to live with each other? If that came up, do we really want to just coexist? Do we want to be friends? Do we want to even live in the same block? What do we want to do?
At La Tribuna Hispana, editor Luis Aguilar focused on another side of the issue, from the perspective of a community victimized by hate crimes.
In the case of the Decade of Hate, my intention was to show that the problem is not of now. It's been growing over time. The solutions they have given have been of police character. In the meantime, the attacks against the Hispanos have not only been violent, but also political.
Last year, the FBI reported a 40% increase in hate crimes against Latinos, with some 830 reported victims. The schism within the communities of Long Island is also reflected in the press, in their outlook toward the violence. Omar Henriquez, a community activist, wrote for both Newsday and La Tribuna Hispana in the aftermath of the Lucero killing.
My point to Newsday was, and I said, listen, there's not an acknowledgement that racism exists in Long Island by officials, by school officials, by politicians, by anyone. If I say something about racism to Latinos, they will get it. If I don't have to give examples just to mention.
And these differences in outlook surfaced in Newsday's forum.
The moderator has said about reconciliation and justice, but in terms of in the issue of reconciliation, I said, how can you reconcile something that hasn't been there? There hasn't been there's no love lost there. I mean, there's no harmony to reestablish, no friendship to reintegrate, because there was none to begin with.
It's a reflection of the kind of structural inequity that, and the kind of the political inequity that that these two communities have to deal with.
To foster dialogue between communities, journalists are recognizing that they need to create their own bridges between the Spanish language and English language media.
And we don't feel connected to them because we can't talk to them and we can't read what they write in their own press. So that's a problem which we need to address. We probably have our own internal forum about it and figure out what to do. But it is a problem if we're going to be a regional paper, and if this is a regional issue that people are going to get killed because they're Hispanic or whatever in the street, that becomes an issue for everybody, I think, to worry about.
For our independent sources, I'm Michelle García.
There is really only one boy, one girl, one tree, one forest, one ocean, one mountain, one sky, and one simple way to care for it all. Please visit earthshare.org and learn how the world's leading environmental groups are working together under one name, EarthShare. One environment, one simple way to care for it.
After the recent attacks on Ecuadorian immigrants, Radio Grupo Delgado provided frightened listeners with contact numbers for community advocates and government officials. Zyphus Lebrun has more on the station that has been a voice for the Ecuadorian community in Queens for the last 10 years.
Grupo Radial Delgado stands proudly along Roosevelt Avenue in Queens. The street's been called the main artery of New York's South American community. That's apt, because if the street is the artery, then the station may very well be the heart of New York's Ecuadorian community.
Grupo Radial Delgado.
Here is like the embassy. We fix a lot of problems for different peoples. During the Christmas time, here we'll give free toys to the kids. Just today, when I came in this morning, there were 2 or 3 different organizations waiting for a donation, and we'll give it a donation. I mean, that's the way we are.
Quite literally, the company is more than just a radio station. Customers get access to a travel agency, money transfers, a call center, and a packaging service, all under one roof. They even come to read the paper or watch some soccer on a big screen TV.
It is more as a service to the community, I will say.
Make no mistake, Delgado is a businessman. He started the company with money he earned from working odd jobs when he migrated from Ecuador in 1961.
Then I decided to open up a little small office at that time. I bought an office for $25,000, which was a lot of money. That was all my money I had. I had no money to keep on going, and I had to gamble.
That gamble resulted in a successful travel and packaging agency, and eventually to the birth of the radio station in 1998.
Really, it was like a form of advertisement. In order for us to get the direct consumer, which was the Ecuadorian people, my father felt that the only way that he could do that is by having a radio station.
People that live alone, that the only thing that they have is the radio, and doesn't cost them anything. They listen to news, they know what's going on in the country, and we go to different parts of the country, and they'll be up to date.
Linda Delgado is one of 2 daughters who help Héctor Delgado run the station. According to her, the station reaches over 100,000 people in the tri-state area, all of whom are hungry for news from back home.
Vamos a ver, la 5009, ¿cómo está? Buenos días.
What we do is that we'll connect in the morning time with our radio stations. They'll bring us back the news as to what's going on in Ecuador. And then they'll have their own airtime here in New York. We've purchased radio stations in Ecuador in order to have a chain of radio stations throughout the towns of Ecuador, mainly in like Quito, Guayaquil, Manta, Cuenca, the most popular ones that we have a majority of people here.
Even with all that success, the radio station is not viable enough to sustain itself and has to be subsidized by the other businesses. Still, Delgado looks upon it as perhaps his proudest achievement.
Ever close the company, this will be the last thing that will close the radio, because the way that people talk on the air, the customer, when they call the radio, I mean, it makes you even cry.
That's our show. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. In the meantime, be independent-minded.